Sometimes I think the mountains here remember everything. Every lie, every betrayal, every moment someone thought they could get away with something just because the trees weren't watching. My name's Claire Hensley, and I live up north of Asheville, where the land is stubborn and the people even more so. I'm 37 now, not young enough to be reckless but not old enough to stop caring. I work from home, managing wireless infrastructure for regional hospitals, keeping their signals clean, their patients connected. It's quiet work, technical and tidy. I like things tidy. I live alone since the divorce. No kids. Just me and the house I rebuilt from my grandmother's bones, wooden beams scraped clean of mold, floors sanded smooth over time. I like to start my mornings with a strong cup of coffee and silence. The kind of silence you hear in your chest, not your ears. That's the way my life stayed for 5 years, until Albert Minton moved in next door. He came wrapped in polyester and entitlement, like a man who believed the entire street owed him something just for surviving long enough to retire. He bought the house across the way, big gray monster of a place, had been empty since the Jenkins family moved to Charleston. I remember taking banana bread over in my polite southern way. Albert didn't even open the screen door. Just stared at me through the wires and said, "I don't eat food from strangers." I should have known then. He hated that my property had once belonged to his backyard, hated it more when he realized the parcel included a strip of gravel he believed he'd inherited along with the house. Old county records had split the lot 20 years back when my uncle sold off then rebought pieces during bankruptcy. It was all legal, but Albert didn't care about deeds or history or truth. He wanted what he thought was his. At first it was little things. He'd stand right at the property line in his socks, staring at my bedroom window. Sometimes he brought a tape measure. Sometimes just a mug of coffee and that smug, slack-jawed expression like he'd caught me trespassing in my own yard. I tried being civil. I tried explaining the boundaries, the paperwork, the history. He scoffed. "This was always supposed to be mine," he'd say. "The county made a mistake. I've got a lawyer on it." But his lawyer only confirmed what I'd already known. The papers were clean. The line was final. Still, Albert kept showing up, just close enough to unsettle me but never close enough to trespass. I caught him one night with a flashlight crouched near the hedges. When I stepped outside, he didn't flinch. "Just checking for drainage issues," he said. "This is private property." "Not for long," he replied, then turned and walked off, slow and solid like earth that didn't know how to move. I told myself not to let it get to me. I'd survived worse: cheating ex-husband, 3 miscarriages, a cancer scare that still sits in my blood like a ghost. I've been bent before, but not broken. And yet there was something about Albert. The way he tried to unmake my space inch by inch. I started dreading my own windows. I kept the blinds closed. I jumped at shadows in my own garden. One morning, just before sunrise, I caught him again. He was standing by my bedroom, so close I could see the wrinkle of his socks through the curtain. I stepped outside in my robe. "What the hell are you doing?" He held up a stack of papers. "Surveyor's maps, you need to look at these. I'm going to contest the deed. I've lived here for 15 years. It's mine, not according to these." He tossed the papers down into my flower bed and walked off, humming some old Johnny Cash song, like he hadn't just tried to erase my foundation. That night, I couldn't sleep. My sheets clung damp to my back despite the chill in the air. The corners of his challenge kept slicing into my thoughts. He wanted to exhaust me, corner me, make me doubt. People like Albert don't just want your land, they want your surrender. Quietly, piece by piece, until you forget what no ever sounded like. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, palms pressed to the cold porcelain sink. Outside, the moon cast long shadows across my gravel strip, the one he wanted so dearly. And something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage. I knew rage. This was quieter, sharper, like a key turning inside a long-locked door. I realized I didn't need to explain. I didn't need to ask. This wasn't about who had more papers or louder words. This was about outlasting him. I whispered to myself, "You picked the wrong woman, Albert." And I knew, from that moment, I would make him crawl through his own madness before I gave him an inch. War had come to the mountains, but only one of us knew it had begun. He always wore that damn windbreaker. Navy blue, fraying at the cuffs, zipper worn smooth from fidgeting hands. A man like Everett Tull didn't need armor, but he wore that jacket like a badge of authority. Like he could zip it up and command the world to get off his land. Except it wasn't his land. At least not the portion behind my house near the bedroom windows. The legal parcel was mine, deeded and sealed. But Everett treated it like a birthright ripped from his hands by deceit. Every time I looked out the window, there he was, standing like a statue in protest. I tried to ignore him. I tried for weeks. but it's hard to sleep with a man's shadow cast through your blinds at 5 in the morning. Everett, I called across the yard one Saturday, coffee burning hot in my palm. Steam rose between us, but even that couldn't warm the space his scowl left. You're trespassing. He didn't flinch. Walk in my boundary. That's not your boundary, you sure about that? I took a long sip, let the bitterness settle before I spoke. Positive. Surveyor's mark is still nailed to the tree stump. I've got the deeds in black and white. He smiled, just a curl of lip, no humor in it. Paper lies. From behind his kitchen window, his wife peered out. Tiny figure behind the glass, a flicker from the television dancing over her pale face. That dish on their roof gobbled up half the sky, pointed like a gun at the heavens. I knew she barely left the house. That was when the idea came to me, ridiculous and cruel in a way I didn't recognize at first. I called up an old contact from my wireless systems days, dug out a signal jammer from storage. Small thing with a boxy antenna I wired into an outdoor switch. I mounted it under the eaves behind the garage and aimed it dead at their dish. Set the timer, activated it, and waited. 10 minutes before the hour, the dish snapped to silence. I imagined her yelling from inside, her voice rising like steam under pressure. 10 minutes after the hour, signal restored. Every show broken. Every mystery unsolved. At first, it worked exactly as I hoped. Everett stopped pacing my property line. He spent his days on the roof, climbing up and down that ladder, muttering, tinkering, chewing through cokes like a starving man. I could hear his cursing clear as the morning birds. Goddamn piece of garbage, he growled one morning up on the ladder in his slippers. Always when I'm not looking. Always when I'm sitting down. He brought in techs, more than one. Each time they left scratching their heads, no faults found, I started sleeping again. Real sleep, deep, uninterrupted. I even laughed one evening when I heard a wrench go flying off the roof. But peace never holds. 3 weeks in, I answered the door to a tall man in a blazer and rain-slick hat. Mr. Bennett. He said, clipboard in hand, zoning records office. We received a boundary dispute complaint about this property. My spine stiffened. From who? He didn't answer, just handed me a document with my name on it and Everett's signature beside a complaint note. He's contesting the sale of this parcel, the man said. Claims it was never lawfully severed from the original estate. My mouth went dry. It's on the deed. I've got it notarized, registered. You'll need to show all that. Bring it to the township office. You may want to retain counsel. The next week blurred into faxes, appointments, and calls to lawyers. My evenings disappeared under paperwork. My mornings were tight with dread. And yet, through it all, Everett whistled. I walked outside one day and found a fresh line of chalk skirting the edge of the property. His chalk, his line, that useless gesture of defiance painted like it meant something. I snapped. You want to waste your money suing me? I shouted from my porch. Waste the rest of your sad years tied up in hearings? Fine, but you step onto my land again, I'll have you arrested. He didn't shout back. He just stared, that same silent judgment he always wore like a second skin. Then he turned and walked off, slow and measured. I thought that was the worst of it. I was wrong. It began with the neighborhood committee. Kathy from 3 doors down looked uncomfortable when she dropped off the meeting invite. Bit of an awkward topic next week, she said gently. Someone raised concerns about your wireless setup. I blinked. What concerns? Well, signal interference. Emergency bans, apparently. Someone mentioned you used to work in communications. I knew then. Knew in the pit of my chest where guilt starts to rot its way through. Everett hadn't just gone legal, he'd gone public. The next week, half the street stood watching as a municipal truck parked beside my house. 2 men with spectrum analyzers walked the perimeter, scanning frequencies. I disconnected the jammer 2 minutes before they arrived. But paranoia took root. The whispers started. People who used to wave now nodded stiffly. One evening, I overheard Garrett across the street murmur to his wife, if he's jamming stuff, what else is he doing? I stopped going out. I stopped opening curtains. The house, once bright and hopeful, began to feel like a bunker. The irony? Everett stopped showing up entirely. Not on the roof, not on the property edge. He D1 without lifting a finger. And still, I couldn't call it off. Too late now. The stakes had changed. I sat in the living room one night, looking down at the faded blue carpet under my feet. My fingers traced the armrest, worn velvet, threadbare in spots. I remembered buying it with Laura before she left. She used to joke that it felt like petting a tired old cat. I hadn't thought of her in months. I pressed my forehead to my palms. A weighted loneliness settled over me. Why did I do this? I whispered to no one. Not for peace, not really. Not even to protect my property. It had become about winning. That realization tasted bitter. I'd become the man I hated. The moment of defeat came sharp and cold. A letter slipped under the door by hand, no envelope. just a folded page in Everett's unmistakable jittery scrawl. It read, "You can keep the land. You don't deserve it, but you can keep it. She doesn't watch TV anymore. Hope it was worth it." I didn't move for a long time. The paper didn't even twitch in my hand. She doesn't watch TV anymore. I read it again, and suddenly I wasn't angry anymore. I was hollow. The air held its breath. A stillness hung over the yard, thicker than any fog, heavier than any silence I'd ever known. Not even the crows dared to interrupt as I sat on the porch steps, elbows on my knees, face in my hands. The wooden boards beneath me felt rough and warm from the midday sun, but they might as well have been concrete. I hadn't moved in hours. The back parcel lay behind me, quiet as a grave. Except it wasn't mine anymore. Not really. Not the way I wanted it to be. I had won something, hadn't I? I'd tricked the old man, turned his own paranoia into busy work, sabotaged his peace to secure my own. And in doing so, I'd tasted something dark and sharp. Victory, maybe, but bitter and not clean. And yet, lately, I couldn't sleep. Because now, every time I opened a curtain or stepped outside, he waved. Called out to me with a smile, even offered coffee once. That man Thorne, whose tirades used to shake the window panes, now acted like we were kin. Brothers in suffering, bonded by a satellite signal. What had I done? I thought I just wanted peace. Silence. A parcel that was legally mine to be left alone. But somewhere along the road, the game changed. I stopped wanting justice and started craving control. "God," I murmured, my voice coarse and broken. "Is that all I am? Just some petty coward who played tech tricks instead of facing a man head-on?" The wind answered me with a single dry leaf skittering across the concrete. That night, I didn't eat. Couldn't. I wandered the house, touching the walls like a man adrift in his own life. My hand trailed along the paint, the ridges in the plaster, the worn wood of the doorframe, as if I'd only just noticed the place I'd called home for 3 years. I stopped in the back hallway next to the breaker box. That was where I'd installed the timer for the jammer, hidden behind a false vent cover. My fingers hovered over it now, and I felt the chill from the metal plate seep into my skin. Cold, deliberate, like I'd been, I opened it, stared at the device. One flip of a switch would kill it again, but something held me back. Instead, I walked outside and crossed the yard. It was dusk, and the sky glowed dusty gold. The fence between our places, the invisible one in his mind, had always felt like a wall. But tonight I stepped over it like smoke. I didn't knock, I didn't need to. Thorne stood at the base of his satellite dish, wrench in hand, watching the alignment readout on a small analog gauge. The man looked old tonight. Not just in age, but in weight, like the years had finally settled into his spine. "You back for another miracle fix?" He called over his shoulder without looking. I didn't answer. I just watched him. His overalls sagged at the shoulders, the tool belt weighed heavy on his hips. He moved slower than I remembered, every gesture filled with a deliberate, aching calculation. When I didn't reply, he straightened and turned toward me. His eyes were tired, but not defeated. And that's when it hit me, the truth I should have seen before. He wasn't mean because he was evil. He was desperate. Desperate to hold onto the one thread of his past still in his grasp, that back parcel. It wasn't about square feet. It was about history, pride, regret, maybe guilt, maybe a promise he once made to himself. "You know," he said, wiping his hands on a rag, "Rose used to sit out here, back when she could. She'd sun herself while I worked on this thing." Thinkin' it made her feel closer to the world. That dish was her comfort. His voice cracked a little. "She doesn't come out anymore." I felt the shift in my lungs first, like the weight I'd been dragging finally moved. Not gone. Just repositioned. And I took a breath that felt like I hadn't earned until now. "You were never mad about the land," I said softly. He cut me a look. "That right? You hated what it meant, that you lost it without realizing. That someone else split your piece of the world and made you feel like a fool." He didn't answer, but he didn't deny it either. For the first time, I saw more than just a stubborn geezer. I saw a man whose world had eroded one small loss at a time. Property. Time. Pride, his wife. "You know I messed with your signal," I said. His hands froze. The rag slipped from his fingers. "I had a jammer," I went on. "Time to interrupt the satellite window." 10 minutes before and after the hour. The air between us tightened like a drawn bow. "You," he started, voice low. "You what?" I couldn't take the pacing, I said. "You were always out there under my window. I wanted peace. So I made you busy." The silence that followed felt like walking blind into a thunderstorm. But I didn't run, not this time. He turned fully to face me. "You really did that?" I did. I swallowed, and I'm not proud, but I had to say it. "You deserve at least that." He stared at me for a long time, jaw working, eyes unreadable. Then he scoffed, shook his head. "You son of a bitch, I know, let me guess. You're here to apologize and make it right?" "No," I said, "I'm here to end it." He narrowed his eyes. "End what?" this Cold War we've built. I'm done fencing ghosts. And I think you are too. He didn't answer right away. Just stood there, breathing hard. You really think it's that simple? He said finally. No, I said, but maybe it could be honest. A long silence passed. Then, to my surprise, he looked up at the dish. You ever think, he said slowly, that maybe the land don't matter as much as what you build on it? That was it. The moment, the truth I hadn't known I was searching for. I'd spent so long protecting dirt and boundaries I'd forgotten the whole reason we build fences, not to divide, but to protect what we care about. I want to give Rose something, I said. He blinked. What do you mean? I want to run a line from my roof. Install a proper signal booster. Make her connection stable again. No tricks, no timers, just clean signal. His mouth opened in surprise, then closed. You do that? I nodded. Because I can, and because I should have from the start. He watched me, then slowly, stiffly, he extended his hand. I took it. His grip was dry and calloused, firm like bark, like soil, like stone, but warm. That night I went back home with a clear head and a plan, not a ploy. A plan, one built on truth, on reparations, on clarity, no fear, no turning back. I waited until the frost had kissed the pine needles along the fence line. That morning breathed ice through the windows, even the glass felt brittle under my fingertips. Winter had finally taken its long, pale hand and pressed it over our quiet little road in Landers Hollow. I turned off the interference box. For weeks, Arnold Haldeman had stomped up and down his backyard, red-faced and muttering. His satellite dish stood like a metal sunflower pointing toward the sky, but not even heaven could help him. Every technician he called left scratching their heads, and from my bedroom window, I saw him grow smaller under the weight of his own helplessness. But yesterday, he'd knocked on my door with a bottle of scotch and a grin that didn't reach behind his eyes. You fixed what nobody else could, he said, tipping the scotch against his chest like a knight knighting me with liquor. I smiled and thanked him. Inside, I saw what I needed to see. Something had cracked. The satellite was clear again. My box was off. But something had shifted irreversibly. I started my final move by walking back to his fence the next morning. My breath fanned white in front of me. I brought blueprints, deed copies, and a thermos of coffee just to twist the screw gently. Arnold, I called. He was in a thick wool sweater and mismatched boots, crouching by the base of the dish with a wrench. He turned slowly. Well, if it isn't the man with the magic touch, he grinned, but it faltered when he saw the papers in my hand. I figured now's as good a time as any to put this thing to bed. You and I both know what the records say. Thought we could read 'em together. His jaw hardened, bristles of silver shaking against the curve of his chin. I don't need your papers. I've lived here 32 years. That land was mine since the county paved the street. And yet, I said, setting the thermos down on the fence post, I keep finding you standing outside my bedroom windows. So maybe it's time to draw the line in ink. I know what this is, he spat. You're trying to humiliate me. Win whatever stupid power game you think we're playing. I folded the deed copy quietly and slipped it back in the envelope. I already won, Arnold. You just weren't watching the scoreboard. He surged forward a step, wrench still in hand, but I didn't back up. Not this time. I stood dead still. My skin burned from the air, but I kept my fingers loose, my shoulders squared. I could sue you, he growled. Trespassing with that interference garbage. You think I do know? No, I don't think you know, I said calmly. Because if you did, you'd realize I already cleaned it all up. No proof, no witness, just your word against a guy who fixed your dish and brought you coffee. He stared at the thermos like it might explode. I leaned forward. But I'll make you a better offer. You stop creeping around my windows. Stay off my land. And I won't tell anyone that the reason your wife missed her soap operas is because you couldn't let go of a strip of dirt that isn't even in your name. His hands trembled, not from the cold. From something heavier. She's sick, he muttered. I softened, just a touch. I know, I said. That's why I didn't bury you. But you don't get to make the rest of us miserable just because you are. He stared at me for a long moment and something behind his eyes shifted again, not cracked. Broken wide. Then he turned and walked back inside. Later that afternoon, I found a rake and a rusted post driver leaning against my fence. An unspoken apology. That night, I sat on the back porch, bundled in a wool blanket. Snow flurried in the yellow porch light. The branches above me creaked like old bones. For the first time in weeks, it was quiet all the way to the sky. Then my wife's voice came through the screen door. Did you mean what you said? She asked. That you didn't bury him? I tilted my head. I meant I could've. She stepped outside and handed me a steaming mug. I'm not sure you came out clean, even if you got your piece. I took the mug, felt the ceramics heat blooming into my palms. No, I said, but I came out. That night we went to bed with the curtains open. And Arnold never stood out there again, but here's the twist. 2 months later, city surveyor's trucks showed up, one in the front yard, one in the back. I stepped out, robe and boots, teeth still fuzzy from sleep. A woman in an orange vest peeked at me over a clipboard. Sorry to bother you. Counties digitizing old property records. There were clerical errors on some of the sales from back in '91. We're confirming lines. I stared. The woman squinted at the device in her hand. Looks like your neighbor's old parcel was mislabeled. Says you own about 10 more feet than the last record shows. That line running behind your bedroom should be pushed back. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I shook her hand, thanked her for the info, and went back inside. Later, I watched Arnold through the kitchen window. He was shoveling snow. This time, he didn't glance toward my house once. No lines matter if the war is already over. The quiet always wins in the end.